In 2026, 3CR is celebrating 50 years on air.
Thanks for choosing a 3CR podcast. Throughout June, we're running our annual radiothon, where we ask you, the listener, to make a donation so that we can continue to make great radio. Your donation will help keep us community-owned and community-controlled. Go to 3cr.org.au/donate, and with that done, please enjoy the podcast.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
And the aliens with mind meld and give them the technology. They're bad aliens. So are you surprised that Nazis were influenced by demons?
No, if demons are real, I would definitely think they'd be on the side of the Nazis.
Yeah.
McDonald's is connected to the Clintons. They chop up the bodies and put them into the sausage and hamburgers. People are being cannibalized. Look it up.
And I'm watching CNN talk about this as violent white nationalist protests. We have done everything in our power to keep this peaceful, you know?
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Welcome to Yeah Nah Pasaran, a show about fascism and its gravediggers. I'm Cam Smith.
And I'm Andy Fleming.
And this week we are joined by Kels from the DFW Support Committee. Kels, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on, y'all.
I guess just to begin with, we've got you on to talk about the Prairieland case in Dallas-Fort Worth. Could you tell us a bit about what the case actually involved for our listeners who might not be familiar with it?
So on July 4th of 2025, some folks went out to Alvarado, Texas, which is the outskirts of the massive DFW Metroplex, to Prairieland Detention Facility, which is where they have been holding ICE detainees for deportation. And obviously, most people around the U.S. are familiar. That's not a good place to be held. And so they went out on the 4th of July to show solidarity with the people who were imprisoned during this noise demonstration where people were shooting off fireworks and chanting pretty standard, typical things. The ICE agents placed a call to the Alvarado police. Lieutenant Gross, who is Alvarado Police Department, showed up. Within about 3 seconds of arriving, had pulled out his weapon, aimed at the back of an unarmed protester who was fleeing, and somehow he ended up injured. They say it was a bullet fired from Benjamin Song. We don't agree. Looking at the evidence of the video, you can see this person fired into the ground. But at any rate, everyone who was at that facility, even though they had been dispersing at the time, were arrested and subsequently charged with terrorism, with using explosives, aka fireworks, on 4th of July, and a litany of other charges such as riot, placed in custody at Johnson County, and then subsequently, not only were they arrested, but other people also. There was a massive net cast down by the federal government. Daniel Sanchez, who was found guilty of concealing documents, dropped zines off to my house, and that was considered him concealing documents, simply having reading materials. The feds kicked in my door on July 6th, and other people were accused of helping Song escape. There are people who were tortured into collaborating. There have been people who were just picked up for deleting people from group chats who are currently out on bond, amongst other random assortments. So everything has just been a massive overreach by the U.S. government. And now, after the initial federal trial, 9 people went to trial. 2 people took non-cooperating plea deals. Several people, I believe 4 people, had taken cooperating plea deals, but our 9 who went to trial were found guilty of almost everything that they were charged with. The only things that they were not found guilty of were attempted murder. There were 3 charges of attempted murder. Only one actually stuck, which was Song allegedly attempted murder for Lieutenant Gross. The 2 ICE agents had been thrown in as attempted murders, even though they were not even close.
Kels, you mentioned that there's this disparity in terms of what the prosecution alleges the injuries were and what the evidence seems to show. Surely that would all be cleared up when the details of his injuries were tendered in court. Could you tell us about what that disparity is?
So, largely, his medical records for the injuries have been sealed. What was not sealed was the photo of the injury that they're alleging happened. In the photo, it looks like a big scrape towards the back shoulder. Initially, there was a lot of sensationalism of police officers shot in the neck. But if you were to shoot someone with a high caliber rifle in the neck, they would not be out of the hospital in 3 hours. He was patched up and sent home. We saw some of the body cam footage of one of the officers that reported after everything had happened, and Gross was sitting in the car, and you can hear the officer say, "You weren't shot, you were grazed." So there was an injury allegedly caused by Song, but it was, if you see the photos, it's superficial. I've gotten worse falling on a pool deck. So I personally don't see it, but obviously this is a fascist-run state. They got a story. They're going to absolutely howl that a cop was injured.
I guess one of the other kind of remarkable factors about the case, apart from the numerous holes in the prosecution, is that they also allege that the defendants were members of something called a North Texas Antifa cell. What purpose do you think is served by the prosecution in alleging that, and how does it play into the broader panic that the Trump administration has been trying to engender?
Yeah, the right wing has been trying to make arguments that there's this coordinated Antifa group for years. When one of the journalists started doing research, we found out that the FBI in 2018 looked into someone because they had a DFW Antifa Twitter account. They closed that case. There was nothing to be found there by the federal government's own admission, but they still have very much wanted to paint scary Antifa, and it's Texas. A lot of leftists in Texas, unlike other places, do own guns. So we're like a particularly scary boogeyman for them to try to go after. And I think that's part of why when they saw the chance in this instance, they absolutely jumped on it and took it, because a lot of people are who are more sympathetic towards people fighting fascism are not so sympathetic when you have weapons involved. I don't go one way on the other on that. I'm not going to judge someone for bringing that. Again, it's Texas. Everybody owns guns here. So I think part of it was they were trying to get bigger charges and make this into a scarier thing than it was.
Kels, could you speak a bit about Black Bloc and how that played into the case? Because it seemed like that the idea that there was this conspiracy of Antifas hinged on the fact that everyone was all clad in black. In fact, people weren't.
Yeah, in a traditional sense, Black Bloc is very anonymous. Everyone is all dressed up entirely in black. You have your face covered, you have your hair covered. There's not a lot of identifying features. You can see in the video evidence that they finally released post-trial, Song had on a bright green covering. One of the people was in a spaghetti strap tank top and some jeans. Someone else was in just a random t-shirt and jeans, so not very black bloc, but they were definitely trying to evoke this sense in the media of these anonymous, scary, terrifying people are out there waiting for you covered in black. When you actually see it, that's not true. If someone was in black bloc, they wouldn't be in a tank top.
Kels, at the time of conviction, or the convictions that were obtained in March of this year, former Attorney General Pamela Bondi said that Antifa is a domestic terrorist organisation. How does this rhetoric around terrorism inform the case? Because it was my understanding that under US law there's no such thing as a domestic terrorist organisation, or relatively few laws through which domestic parties can be prosecuted for this sort of thing.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a domestic part of the terrorism. You either are a terrorist or you're not. So what that kind of does is it enhances everything, especially for sentencing, which is coming up. But it also enhanced security during trial. All of our people were basically put into solitary confinement when they weren't at the courthouse. One person, because of the risk assessment that they had under those terrorism charges, was shackled into like a wheelchair and wheeled into their cell. They were not allowed to walk because they were considered a high risk. So a lot of it is the continued fear-mongering, even though legally it's just an enhancement. It would be the same sort of, the supporting terrorism charge is the same sort of thing if you had given money to any foreign organization that the US considers terrorism. That's what they're charging this under.
I assume organisations like the NRA have been coming out in support of the defendants?
No.
No.
You would think that would be like very useful and we wouldn't be opposed because we're like, there's a fun little game that Texans play every 4th of July called Is It Fireworks or Is It Gunshots? Because it's not uncommon for people to shoot in the air during 4th of July. It's not uncommon for there to be a ton of illegal fireworks. You're not supposed to set them off, but everyone does. And they're very visible, and the cops don't care. So in the trial, when they were like, oh my gosh, people weren't even turning around because they heard gunshots. Yeah, dude, it's 4th of July. All of us hear those noises for 2 weeks, like the week before and the week after. This is not terrorism to have fireworks. One of the notes in trial was one of the cooperating people mentioned that one of the fireworks went off in his hand and he still has a hand. So these are not massive explosives. These are like bottle rockets that random kids do shoot at each other. Was it a great move? No. Don't let fireworks go off in your hands. But very clearly, these are not explosive devices.
The other suspect device that the authorities obtained was some zines. I think you referred to them earlier. That seems quite remarkable that someone should be arrested and prosecuted for possessing or transporting zines. What's going on in that case?
Yeah, so Daniel has been like a longtime friend of mine and is an immigrant who is here, and he was in the process of naturalization, and his wife was one of the people who was picked up at the protest, and he was like, hey, I don't feel super comfortable with my political stuff right now. I'm going to toss it. And my roommate and I are like very big book and zine collectors. We have 6 bookshelves worth of stuff. As most lefties tend to do, we hoard all sorts of reading material. So I was like, oh, don't throw it away. You can drop it off at my house. I'll love to read your notes and see whatever you have, because sometimes people have different stuff. So he went and he dropped off the zines and some of his art, because he's an artist, over at my house. My roommate took it inside. We didn't even open the box yet. And then I was going for a walk to decompress, finding out my friends were like kidnapped by these awful people. And 2 FBI agents pulled up behind me in an unmarked car, hit lights. And I was like, oh, what the hell? And I don't know if I still have the link, but one of the neighbors across the way filmed while they had me detained at a children's park, like a play park. They had 4 SWAT team members and an armored vehicle outside of my apartment. They knocked on the door, then they broke the glass, threw in a flashbang, and kicked in the door, all over a box of zines. And those zines that they took out of my house after completely trashing it were considered concealed documents. And so he wasn't concealing any documents. These are readily available political speech things. We are supposed to have that under free speech protections, but they instead used it as a lot of fear-mongering about. One of the zines was a review of the movie Midsommar, but it was like, the satanic death cult is real. Yeah, that got thrown out there with no context, amongst other things that were in there. So even though that was his stuff that he was giving to a friend and had nothing to do with his wife, none of that was hers, it still somehow is prosecutable to have those things. And we know because he got convicted of having those things.
You are listening to Yerna Passaran here on 3CR, 8:55 AM, 3cr.org.au and 3CR Digital on your DAB radio. We're currently talking to Kels from the DFW Support Committee about the recent Antifa trial in Texas. If this is the sort of radio that you appreciate, you can support it by going to 3cr.org.au/donate and pledging a donation during this month's Radiothon. We would really appreciate it. All right, back to Kels.
I guess the thing about the prosecution is it takes place in a context in which there's widespread resistance in the United States to ISIS depredations. Presumably, it's intended to have a chilling effect on anti-fascist activity, but also opposition to ICE.
Yeah, I would make that argument. And I feel like the reason that they came down so hard was to set a precedent, like a legal precedent, because none of this has ever really been tried before. They've edged a little bit with Cop City of like, how far can we push the established law to fight against left-wing resistance? But this, they saw the opportunity of, it's a notably red area. It is very right-wing in the systems that it has. Most major cities in Texas are Democrat, liberal kind of havens versus the rest of Texas can be a little sketchy. But this particular area is one of the only major cities that has a strong Republican backing. So they saw they had the right justice system. They had a Trump appointee as the court, the 2 judges that were available to take this case. Both of them were appointed by Trump. And they had the scary weapon situation. So they took this as, oh, we're going to have an easy win. And now you're seeing other protesters being criminalized heavily for things that they probably wouldn't have pre-trial, where there was a win. A lot more people are getting swept up. So I feel like this was a test case and now they're getting what they want. So they're running for it.
Kels, could you speak a little bit about how the trial actually went? I was surprised to see that there was a mistrial over a blouse at one point.
Yeah. So I was not allowed to be in the courtroom as a witness. So I'm going to give you the highlight reel that I got, which was the initial mistrial really was, so For those of you who are not familiar with how most places kind of work same. Texas just has a couple little caveats. They pull random voters in. If you are registered to vote, you can be called for a jury. They pulled a bunch of people from that district into that court. And the group that they got for the initial trial was not who the judge wanted. There was one person who was like, I am not a fan of ICE. My dad died in the detention facility that these people were protesting. But you can't jury shop. You can't just be like, oh, this jury seems to be siding with the defendants too much. So instead, he looked at one of the lawyers, and a notable civil rights attorney had just passed. So she had on a shirt under her blazer that were civil rights attorneys. And the judge said that was biasing the jury. So he declared a mistrial. And usually the prosecution gets strikes for jurors where they're like, I won't take that juror. I don't want that juror. And the defense also has an even number of those that they can strike. And the judge doesn't usually get involved in Texas trials. That's not how that works. This judge was so displeased that the jury pool seemed to not be on the side that he wanted. He used that blouse t-shirt to declare a mistrial, and then he decided he would select the jury. He would increase the jury pool. It went from a jury pool of about 78 people to a jury pool of about 122 people. And then he selected the people that he wanted.
Which is not how it's typically done.
It's a very unusual thing to do in a Texas court. I understand, talking to some of the lawyers, that judges do select jury pools in other locations, but that's not how Texas runs trials. So it was like, yeah, legally you can do this, but it's a breach of etiquette to do that. You're essentially telling your prosecutor that you're incompetent. I don't trust you to run this trial. I'm going to run it, which is, again, unusual for Texas, because a lot of the second caveat is Texas judges are an elected position. You can run for judge in Texas and not have a bar license, which wild. Most of the time people who are running for judge they were lawyers, but technically you don't have to. So being a judge does have a lot of political parts to it. You're not just assigned. You can be elected into that position. So most judges are very careful to not upset the people who tend to elect them. This guy was an appointee because he was federal level, but he did several breaches of etiquette for that one.
Given all these legal manoeuvrings, Kel, what's the current legal situation? I understand sentencing is yet to take place. What are the other kind of legal avenues that remain open to the defendants to question these convictions?
So there are several rounds of appeals. The initial appeals went out. Usually the judge should rule on those appeals. He has not yet. Hey, I don't feel like I was adequately represented, or I feel like the jury pool was tainted, or anything like that. You only have 2 weeks after trial to do that. Those obviously have been submitted and just summarily ignored. We've worked really hard to have community members write in and talk about how wonderful all of the defendants are, how they have ties to our community, how we want them back. But sentencing is going to happen on the 23rd, which is next Tuesday, for 8 of the 9 people who went to trial. One person, his attorney, doesn't have their scheduling conflicts, so that particular one won't happen until July 1st for reasons. I have no idea. It was sealed. And then we have a few other people who took non-cooperating plea deals, so they did not snitch on their friends. They just said, yes, I did whatever crime. Their sentencing is also coming up here shortly, I believe mid-July. And after sentencing, there will be another round of appeals and hopes that this can get reopened, because obviously this is a very politically motivated case, and we're going to do everything we can to work hard to bring our people home.
Kels, the Trump administration has declared or redeclared war on anti-fascism in the United States. Is there other evidence outside of this case of that having effects? How important do you think this case is in particular in terms of its realising its goal of criminalising anti-fascism?
We're seeing protesters get charged with things in other areas that they ordinarily wouldn't have. We're seeing a lot more terrorism charges start popping up. And recently across the US, there were raids against Palestinian organizers' houses. And I don't want to say, yes, that's clearly a result of this case. But I will say that a lot of that did not start happening until they felt very emboldened to make that happen. And I think when it's clear that the legal system is behind them on doing these massive sweeps, it's going to affect people's lives, and it's going to impact organizing as a whole, because they are holding our people hostage in cages. I don't think it's going to stop people from organizing, because we knew that they were fascists before they started doing this. Now we just have very demonstrable proof of, look at what they do when you disagree with them. But I think we have not seen the end to how far they're going to push what they can. And that's going to really suck for a lot of people. And it's not an easy thought to have.
Kels, if people want to read more or if they want to support the Prairieland defendants, where can they go to?
Sure. We have Blue Sky and I think Mastodon and an Instagram, DFW Support Committee. We have a website, prairielanddefendants.com. And people are also welcome to, reach out, email, however they would like. We have a Give, Send, Go. Give, Send, Go, not my favorite website, but it was the only one that wouldn't take down our stuff. GoFundMe absolutely will, and so will a lot of crowdsourcing platforms. But we also encourage people to show solidarity in their own way. Some Greek comrades have done banner drops. Letter writing is always very popular. You can find information how to write letters to folks on our website or on any of our social media. But yeah, we would love to see how people creatively want to show solidarity.
We'll leave it there. Kels, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Andy, that is our show. We'll be back next week. Just a reminder, it is a Radiothon month at 3CR. If you would like to support radio like this, you can go to 3cr.org.au/donate. See you next week.
See you then.
3CR celebrating 50 years.
This June, we'll be asking for your donations to support 3CR.
Your donation during Radiothon keeps the station radical and enables us to give voice to our community for another year.
All donations over $2 are tax deductible.
To donate, go to 3cr.org.au. Show your support by donating this June.
3CR, celebrating 50 years.
Keffiyehs are Palestinian scarves, and they're a symbol of support for justice for the Palestinian people. From the traditional black and white keffiyeh to an array of modern designs, explore the range and order online or drop by 3CR during business hours. Wear your support for the rights of Palestinians. Go to keffiyehs.org.au, that's KUFIYAS.org.au. A 3CR supporter.